watching right now? Oh. I'm so used to that little live thing coming up that they've eliminated to save money. I bet they've saved 20 or 30 bucks that way. So what did I call this talk?
See the parts to see the whole.
See the parts to see the whole. So we're talking about W-H-O-L-E, whole. See the parts of any given thing in order to see its wholeness. Also, see the parts to see that things are not separate. See the separations to see that fundamentally things are not really separate. They just look that way. When we are fastened on one part as opposed to another part, this breaks everything into what? Parts. And the extreme of that is called warfare. Anytime you're picking and choosing and judging this is better than that, you're at war, even if your motive is peace. Don't do it. But if you do that, you find yourself in some kind of conflict with yourself or with your partner, with the world, with your Facebook friends. I would say slow down. It's very difficult to do that without awareness practice, without a meditation practice. It's very difficult to take what inside of our consciousness and our mind feels like tension and difficulty and pain and struggle and something's wrong, somebody's going to pay kind of thing. Somebody's got to pay for this pain I'm going through. Anytime anything arises, positive, negative, or neutral, the minute you attribute blame, you start to separate things. It's not that one thing doesn't cause something else. This, moving through space, striking something, causes a sound. But what happens is we get very simple-minded, you could say. You could also say very materialistic, you could say, and say that that's cause and effect. This caused that. But when we do this, and this is something I've talked about in so many different ways, and that's why some people say, you say the same thing over and over again. I'm just getting sick of it. Say something new. So what happens is we're not taking into consideration what's called the big picture, or as Suzuki Roshi in California back in the 60s would have called it, big mind. The big mind. The big mind that doesn't discriminate between this and that just sees the complete integrity. You don't have to give something integrity. You just have to see that it's already the case. You don't have to attain enlightenment. You just have to see that you are already and had never been separate from the awakened one or the Buddha. The word Buddha Dharma means awakened truth. It means not truth coming out of cause and effect or true and false, but out of awakened truth, out of the clarity of seeing what is fundamentally true. And that fundamental truth, as the Buddha reported 2,500 years ago, is everything is dependently arisen. Nothing comes from its own side as an independent self or deity or a devil or gin and tonic. Everything is combinations of things. So what am I saying? I'm saying that in your sitting practice, in your everyday, in your post-meditation, in your meditation practice, in your post-meditation, see the parts, but don't add on to them. When you see something difficult, don't call it. Don't add to. Don't judge. Don't push it away. Don't do anything with it. Just see it. When something the other direction comes up, don't fluff that up or exclaim, "Oh, how wonderful! This finally something good is happening." sitting practice of meditation, sitting down, holding still the way it is taught here and has been taught for centuries. Hold still, see what moves. And what moves is going to be the separations, the relative truth of our world, the causes and conditions that are constantly pulling us this way and pulling us that way, and encouraging us to take a position, decide what to do, be decisive, and so on. And what am I saying? Don't do anything unless you have to. That's called patience. Wait. You could say wait, but it's also just, if you don't have to do anything, don't try to scare up some energy just so you'll look good to your own tapes that your parents played for you. You need to get a job. You need to do this. You need to get it. You shouldn't. You should do this. You shouldn't do that. We all have those. I have them, so I know about them. And I'm saying, don't turn away from that. Don't try to shut that off. Don't correct. Just observe. Just look and see what it is. See what it fundamentally is so that you can awaken. You have whatever, you might have a year left of your life. You might have 50 or 60 years. You may have more than that. I don't know. Maybe all of us are going to go up in an atomic blaze in the next 3 days. Sorry to be so pessimistic. I don't think that's going to happen, but I'm not a fortune teller. But what I would say is, it's a precious human birth. You've been born, you're a human being. There's no way you can decide, or at least you don't remember deciding, I think I'm going to check out being a human being. I mean, I've been an alien. I've been a frog. You think I'm going to say mouse. Just because I have a whole row of stuffed mice. They're like trophies. That's what we do with our mice when we kill them. Precious human birth, you're here. My goodness, think about it. My badness, think about it. You're here. You've been born. You had a mom and a dad, and you have maybe brothers and sisters, maybe not. You have a certain level of intuition operating. You have a certain level of intelligence. You may be beautiful. You may be average. You may be homely. You may be young. You may be old. There's all kinds of things going on. Don't do anything with anything other than look at it. See the parts. Don't look for wholeness. Wholeness is just another. It's a hype. Don't look for it. Look at the parts. Don't miss them. Look at the parts of your thoughts. When thoughts are arising, just observe. Don't add on, I don't like that thought. Don't fluff it up. I really like, I'm having power of positive thinking. Don't do anything with it. Unless you do. So that's the part that's hard to explain, or that's at one time I'm telling you what to do, and at the same time I'm totally validating whatever you do. What do I call that? Not two. They're not separate. Sandokai, the equality of sameness and difference. You have to see it yourself. If you don't see it yourself, it's going to look like the equality of sameness and difference. The equality of sameness and difference. You have to see it yourself. You have to hear it yourself. You have to strike those together yourself. You have to do this. This is a do-it-yourself enlightenment project. You have to do it. It's not a belief system. There's nothing here to believe. There's nothing to disbelieve. So therefore, if you want to believe it, believe it. If you want to disbelieve it, disbelieve it. But be very aware of of the position you're taking on it, because nothing lasts. As soon as you take a position, it starts to crinkle. All the Virgos know that. And the Pisces. So have you noticed that as soon as you start to solidify something starts to change? That's not going to work. Or maybe it will. Maybe it'll work for a little while. So if you can see the parts, if you can experience your own mind, if you can sit down and have the so-called negativity, negative emotions, feelings, thoughts, possibly just emotions with no story, those are the hardest kind. Sometimes if you have those daily, after a while we can't stand it, so we cave and we decide to call it depression. But it might be much better to stay with that emotion instead of giving it some kind of a tarpaulin over the top of it, so you no longer can investigate it. Depression, I am depressed. Don't do that. Keep the tarpaulin off to one side in case it gets so horrible that you can't stand it. Then maybe you might have to label it. But for as long as you can, just look and see what the texture of those emotions. See what that. Why does that hurt? Why? What is that hurts? Rather than saying, well, that's depression. Well, now I got that covered. Now I can go on and ignore that and see if I can't ignore that so much that I can kind of pretend to be happy. We see a lot of this. I can't be the only one that sees this. And most people are not interested in an awareness practice. Most people are interested in fixing themselves, in looking at what's wrong and in some way stopping it, fixing it, changing it, being a different person. And this particular path is, as I see it and as I talk about it, is find out who you are. Find out deeply who you are. And that may be not covering that stuff up. And it can manifest so many different ways. It can manifest just intense feeling with no story at all. It can manifest as intense difficulty with a bunch of stories about blaming, or stories about saying, well, this must be true because this happened and that happened, or it was the way I was raised, or it was, those stories are endless. Blaming. Everyone is wired a little differently, so therefore, when you sit down on the cushion, I've never been anybody like you, but yet you're a human being. Same, but different. So you're here, when you sit down on the cushion and bring everything to, gently bring everything down to this just very still point. Still, silent. When you do that, then you can see more precisely and closely the racket that is probably going on in the back of your mind, or in the front of your mind, or halfway up. This is chirping at that, and this is talking to this, and this part of your mind is talking to this part of your mind. When that really gets carried away, and you take it to medical people, they call it schizophrenia, and they medicate you, or they call it psychosis. Those are not solutions. Those are labels. And it's not that somebody couldn't be helped by maybe as much by medication as by meditation. I'm not at war with it. I'm just saying this meditation is another way of working with this, besides putting a medication in there that is going to somehow do something with that, dissolve the problem, or cover up the problem, or rewire your nerves. So see the parts, if you can actually see the parts. And if you're sitting, let's do this with meditation and post-meditation. So in meditation, if you're sitting and anything that is moving, anything you see is a part, and it has its own space, its own time, its own velocity, its own texture. And if you do anything with that, you actually interfere with your insight into it. If you push on it based on it being uncomfortable, if you fluff it up or magnify it based on it being comfortable, let's get more of that. or if you shut down on it, close it off, drug yourself away from it, or distract yourself away from it by binge watching Netflix, which I do a lot, by the way. I really like to binge watch Netflix. It's not about not doing any of that. It's about bringing as much awareness to it as you can, and then if you need to keep doing that, it will happen just naturally. And if it's necessary for that to start to slow down and back off, it will happen in a natural and harmonious way. There are no guarantees. So if your understanding of what I'm saying is a certain way, and you practice and you get disappointed, then you can't blame me. It's your fault. So see the discontinuous identity that keeps showing up on the cushion. And then on post meditation, when you get up, rather than try to do anything with the mind to make yourself more meditative or make yourself live up to some kind of a kind, peaceful person, I'm not saying you should do the opposite, go around and play bumper cars with everybody. But that's why Buddhism is called the middle way. Not too tight, not too loose. Do a little bit of that. Give yourself some space so you can get to know yourself, not only on the cushion, meditating, but also when you get up and you interact. You're fixing a meal with someone else. You're taking the garbage out. You're at the mall interacting with, working around strangers, people that you don't know, and you're having various kinds of energetic interactions. Insofar as you can, just watch. Rather than try to make yourself into a person that is a certain way, like a kind person who never would hurt a flea. Rather be genuine, actually allow, and you can learn to do this through the sitting practice of meditation. You can learn to just be who you are, just be genuine, sit down one day and you're feeling great. Sit down another day, feeling great. Great meditation. Might even be bragging about it. I had the greatest meditation. Shit. I don't think anybody's had a meditation like that before. I'm probably one of the greatest meditators I've ever met. Well, next to Sokuzan, maybe. So what am I saying? I'm saying be genuine. Actually allow yourself, the way you train yourself to be kind to others is to be kind to yourself. This does not mean indulgent. It means give yourself a little bit of a break. That doesn't mean, overdoing it in some direction, particularly. Although it may look like that to others, but if you're doing it out of your own genuineness and out of your own sincerity, that you really want to see who you are, what this world is about, and why, not to say why, but what you could do, if anything, about all the chaos, incredible chaos that is showing up everywhere, especially the last few months. It's been there all along. It's just we've been able to ignore it. And then all of a sudden, it's pretty hard to ignore some of that. So if you see the parts, I use that same, going back to that same image, which is, I titled this talk because I had a little bit of inspiration around that. If you see the part without fussing with it at all, you could call it a thought form. It could be anything. It could be just a feeling of maybe jealousy coming up, some kind of so-called negative emotion. Do nothing with it. If you're doing it, if you're trying to stop jealousy, or trying to explain jealousy or justify the jealousy, then this just adds to the circularity that we call samsara, this confusion, constantly going around chasing our own tail, trying to be happy. Everyone's trying to be happy. Have you noticed how many different ways people try to do that? It's astonishing. You ever watch Shameless? Anybody seen that? William H. Macy on there. Just watch how he's trying to get happiness. He's such a great actor. Good show. So, by holding very still and training ourselves to just observe, to be very, very good observers of our life, very good observers of other people and how they're acting and functioning without stepping into it, without correcting anyone. This doesn't mean that if you have a child who's running into the road likely to get hit, you shouldn't correct them and maybe even scold them or relate to them in whatever way is going to stop them from doing that. So there's some things that are choiceless. You have to correct that. But if you don't have to do anything, don't. And in this way, we slowly train ourselves to be more and more and more observant about our world, about our environment, about the people we live with, about the people that we interact with all the time. And we're more apt to, as we give ourselves a little bit of the benefit of the doubt as far as working with our feelings and emotions, that starts to be extended out to others in such a way that they might not even see it. They might not be aware of how much space you give them. A lot of generosity is invisible. A lot of kindness is invisible as far as a credential. So if one is, just to take it to the end of the using the whole title of the talk, if you're able to see everything moving in your mind without adding to it, subtracting from it, or dividing it. Those are the three poisons. Passion, I like it, I want it, it should do this, it shouldn't do that, I should, they should, he should. Aggression, get rid of it, take it away, this is bad, the enemy. Or the other one is just drop it, just find some way to just, if that's bothering you, just find some way to just get out of here. If you start, it's pretty hard to see that you do that in post-meditation or everyday life unless you've really practiced on a real micro basis. You can't see the macro. You can't see the big picture unless you first see the very, very tiny details that are happening in your mind moment by moment. Microcosm, macrocosm, same thing, equality of sameness and difference. Just named her room. She now has a room. What's the name of your room?
Sound okay?
Yeah. So now we have a name. Do I have any rooms left to name? Where?
Aren't there 3 rooms in Karma House? Cloud Palace?
Yeah. Let's try to be cute. You're succeeding. Being cute. So if you actually see those bits and pieces of those parts and the various aspects of your mind coming and going and you don't do anything with it. You don't try to push something down or fluff something up or shut something off. I'll say it again: push something down, fluff it up, or shut yourself off from it. In other words, manipulate something or manipulate your experiences around it. Just be there. You have to do a whole lot of this. It probably is not, I don't know for sure, but probably is not going to work to just meditate every few days, when you're inspired. I think I'll meditate for a while. It seems to be necessary to, you can't just sharpen your knife just when you feel like it. You have to sharpen it daily if you're going to cut with it daily. So think of it like a blade. Sharpen. That's the time, the most important time in a blade's life is when it's being sharpened, and it's also the most useless. Sharpen. That's why it feels, if you're sitting and you're feeling and you're meditating and you've been doing this for 3 months, 3 years, 3 decades, and you feel useless, you're doing it correctly. Or not. I get to do that all I want, because I'm sitting up here. Sameness and difference. If you see those little parts move, then that microcosm, macrocosm, that starts to translate into all the huge movable parts that are all over your world, and you begin to see the incredible synchronicity and harmony of everything, even though there's intense violence and difficulty happening in different places. If you go to war with that difficulty, you just darken that whole area. Gets darker. It does not get lighter. There is only one thing happening, and even that is doubtful. But you have to find that out. It's not something to believe, not something to be promoted, although it probably looks like I'm doing that. Questions?
What is the one thing happening?
That nothing is happening. More?
A question about the talk.
Certainly.
You have to see the parts to see the whole. And earlier you said don't look for the whole, you don't need to see the whole.
Don't look for it, you know. Just like
how does the whole arise or appear?
it arises as parts. Remember the light and darkness we talked about in the interview? If you seeing the light, don't. How does it go? Yeah, you know, that's a good example. Looking for the darkness. In darkness there is light, but don't look for the light. Something like that.
Light and darkness are a pair, like the foot before and the foot behind and walking.
Very good, thank you.
Within light there is darkness, but do not try to understand that darkness. Within darkness there is light, but do not look for that light.
So it's a way of saying that, it's a way of encouraging all of us, and this is so, there's practically impossible to convey this in concepts. So therefore these kind of koans or conceptual kind of puzzles are presented to us, encouraging you to drop your position, for lack of a better way of saying it. I don't really say that, but it's kind of a way of saying you don't have to hang on to anything. Everything is already perfect as it is. In Longchenpa in the 14th century, incredible Tibetan sage back from that time, talked about the great perfection. There's really nothing to be corrected. There's nothing broken. But it has to be seen. So, but if you say in darkness there is light, or in light there is darkness, and then but don't do anything with that. If you do something with that, you kind of reinforce the separation and are trying to squeeze wholeness out of separation. Is that funny? I knew I'd get somebody to smile. Yes?
Question from Stephen Smith in West Virginia.
Stephen Smith, where have you been?
He's the one that went to Naropa a long time ago.
Yeah? Naropa.
He asks, thank you, Sokuzan. I've always been attracted to what you are saying about just noticing what arises but not doing anything. There seems like in this a possibility of relaxing, allowing myself to just be and accept things as they are. Finally allowing, not having to manipulate or change the way things are. There seems to be a freeing quality in this. Why is it that we sometimes feel more energy around others, and how can we create that energy for ourselves?
Stop trying to create any energy. Energy doesn't belong to anybody. And as soon as you try to do anything or manage or manipulate things to get your own ends or to get your own way, then you buy right into the samsara, this wheel of spinning life and death, life and death. You buy into relative truth. Don't do anything with it unless you have to. And I say it that way, and I probably have said this 1,000 times if I've said it once, is if you don't do anything, if you can train yourself to just be here, I'm not talking about passivity. That's a position. I'm not talking about a position. But if you can train yourself to just observe, just be, sit on the bank of the river, watch the fish, watch the blue heron eat the fish. Look up in the clouds and watch the clouds go by. It seems to be necessary to take very, very personal so-called personal experiences and depersonalize them on some level without going to war with them, saying that it's just movement. It's just movement. Movement and stillness. Sandokai. If you see it, it's like, how can I tell this to people? Will anybody even give me permission? Will they even stop long enough in their busy life and listen to what I'm saying? So if you see it, you realize that everybody has this. Everybody, if you find, look in everybody's backbone and find the off and on switch. As it says, lighten up. More.
From Sheldon in
No,
Takancha.
Sheldon. He's sitting in that mansion down there. I heard that some billionaire gave him a place to live for. He won't like that. Did you hear about his house sitting? You didn't? We know what you're up to down there, Sheldon. Raiding the refrigerator. Go ahead.
He asks, is thinking we know something actually an incorrect view of something as the whole rather than the parts?
Assuming any kind of, all knowledge is partial, all evidence is partial. You can't find proof for anything. You can, if you want to manipulate the world and get your own way and shut other people out, then you can call some things right and some things wrong. And then the whole world will divide up into a whole bunch of so-called parts. But if you see what those parts are and see that they're not separate, then that's a realization. It doesn't get rid of the parts. You just see that they're not separate. And it's a realization, not an experience. Experiences come and go. Here's my example. There's an experience, now it's gone. You want me to give you an example of an experience that doesn't do anything? Oops, I slipped, I moved my eyes. Well, I'm not perfect. Don't look at me like that. Further questions? Bailey?
How do we see what a part is without breaking it into smaller parts?
See that you break it into smaller parts. All you have to do is, it's just a function of just seeing or witnessing or hearing or smelling or tasting. Just your sense fields operating with the objects that come up in the senses, which could be anything from thoughts to feelings to emotions to smells, tastes, feelings, sounds. Do nothing with it. And the process of practicing that begins with seeing the way you keep changing what happens to you into something else. Like you reinterpret. It's like the language is very clear coming to you. What's being said or what's being provided to us is very clear, but we confuse it by changing it into something else and thinking, well, there must be more, must be something else. So the practice, to respond to your question, from the point of view of practice, is hold still and practice seeing the way we keep dividing things. If you watch that, eventually, over time, another way of saying it using an image, a metaphor, you'll see that that the way we keep dividing things is a very simple process of ignoring our passion, aggression, and ignorance. That it's if you watch it and don't do anything with it, you'll see that it's getting that fuel from somewhere. And then just by seeing it, it just dies out, because it only gets it's only provided with momentum by objecting, agreeing, or ignoring. If you object to something, if you agree with something, if you ignore something, then it keeps doing whatever it's doing, or it goes against what you're saying. So awareness, the very name, the very word Buddha, awakened, the awakened one, the awakened person, being. What did he awaken to? Nothing is separate. everything is dependently arisen. There's not a separate thing anywhere. Looks separate, but this is not separate from the tree that it grew in. It's not separate from the person who carved it. It's not separate from the person who's about to place it on this altar. Not separate. That's just a simple one. But they're everywhere. You're not separate from any molecule, any atom, any quark, any universe, any galaxy. You're just as close to the galaxy, the whole entire Milky Way as you are to the cars in the parking lot. And why are you close? Because you're not separate from that. Yes, sir.
Is realization separate from experience?
No, it's not separate. Nothing separate from anything.
But is realization not experience or a experience?
To grasp, let's put it this way: if you don't grasp at the experience by grasping, if you don't reject the experience, in other words, if you don't agree with the experience, and if you don't disagree with the experience, and if you don't look away or shut yourself off from the experience, then it's realization. But it's no longer experience. It's not doing anything. Nothing is occurring. And space and time begin to collapse at that point and expand at the same time. Are you agreeing with me? Be very careful.
It was my next question. You were addressing my next question.
All right. Did I do it?
I think so.
Well, I'd like to hear the question that I answered.
What then? If what are the parameters of an experience?
Yeah, that's a good one. It's always something that is happening right here, right now. This is experience, but this situation is not separate from realization, but it's not something that occurs. Like an experience occurs, but the space within which things occur is the realization. If you want to continue to use relative ideas, so realization is always here. The idea that we go forward in time or that we remember the past. You had a really good experience of that recently.
How do we speak about realization in terms of having experiential qualities? What is that pointing at?
It doesn't do anything if you're not attached to it, if you don't accept it, reject it, or look away from it. If you don't do anything with it, then it'll have experiential qualities. The experiential quality that I have that is more prominent to me than it was a number of years ago is if I'm looking out here, I see people, I'm watching you, I'm talking to you, I'm enjoying being here. And if I look back and try to find a person here, I don't see anything. I also don't see the absence of anything necessarily. I don't see anything. So there's just this. And at the same time, there's just this, not separate. This is not separate from this. You're not separate from each other. Not separate from anything, anywhere. It's not separate. It's one situation is a way of, I rarely use that word, one. Because even if you say it's one, then you create its opposite. It's also zero. So why the whole thing of existence, non-existence is a very interesting puzzle. More? Lisa?
If we're on the path, if we've taken a vow to be with all things, how do we not get tripped up by looking at the parts and thinking that's all there is?
So the way you do it is look at the parts. The other thing you said about was extra, thinking that's all there is. That's not looking at parts. That's thinking that's all there is. That's actually leaving what you were looking at and going to an evaluation or opinion or an idea of it. So stay with the parts. Just look at the parts, and when you look at the parts, you'll start to see the spaces between the parts, the interval. And you'll see that the space and the parts are not separate from each other. Not separate, not separate, not separate. And when you realize it, then even the words not separate doesn't even work anymore. It's just this. And even that doesn't work. Then I say, as it is. Is that what that says up there? Ascites? I got ascites. You got ascites? No, I actually have arthritis, which I would like not to have. That's the only part of my experience that I'd like to get rid of. Any ideas? Who said yup? Yeah. That'll end something. So further questions would be good if you have them. Yes.
Do you have other words besides not separate to describe not separate?
The traditional word, go back in the Indian tradition, is the Sanskrit word advaita. Dvaita means separated. Advaita means not separate, non-dual, not two, lack of two-ness.
When you sit,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, when you
Please.
sit here and
Yeah.
talk,
Yes.
it makes perfect sense to me. But when I'm not in this room or I'm off the cushion, going about my daily work, it gets very divisive.
All you have to do is see the divisiveness. You don't have to do any more. If you just see it,
Is that not separate?
yeah.
Just seeing
Just
the
see it.
divisiveness
Just
is.
see it. When if you see it, then let's say if this is the divisiveness, and you see it, then what is seen, and if you see it without adding anything to it, like who caused this? Well, a guy named Tom actually carved this, right? Tom Rowski, yeah, up in Wisconsin. So if you see, if you call this divisiveness and you see it, and you do nothing with it, you don't add to it, you don't subtract from it, you don't look away from it, you don't do anything, then that which is observing and that which is observed are also seen to be not separate. There is no one here, there's no observer, there's just this. And it is not an experience. It does not come nor go. Questions are good if you have them. Is that the end of our sojourn?
If
Goes
there's
on.
no this or no thing separate, then who is it that realizes?
The realization realizes. Buddha nature realizes itself. Your personal identity both goes away and doesn't do anything at the same time. Again, not two. It both goes away, personal identity is gone, and yet the personal identity is totally there. I just said two opposing things, not two. Sandokai, which is the Japanese for the equality of sameness and difference. We use sameness and difference to reinforce and fuel ego, our self-centeredness, our warfare, our I'm right, they're wrong. Well, if they would just do this, well, the reason I'm feeling this way is because of what they said or what he said. We see it all over the place, in our families, our culture, our politics, our world, the world. Intense suffering. And it's not that there aren't people who are doing things that are not very helpful and are extremely self-centered. It's just that you can't go to war with them. Even though a lot of people are saying, oh, this is the time to get up off the cushion and go get your M16. I don't think they're saying that. But, go out and march, do something. And don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying you shouldn't be doing that. But I'm saying, first of all, just look at what the situation is as deeply as you can. If you're a meditator, please. Use your meditation practice to see more clearly what is going on in the world Because if you have this going on in your gut and you've not made peace here, as I've said several times, even though you're very, very clear about what's going on, you seem very clear, when you go out into the world, unless this has been resolved, probably some of that warfare is gonna come out against others as anger, because they're doing whatever they're doing. And this is how we get rid of this anger. If you have problems here and suddenly there's a big problem in the world, whew, finally, I can just blame those guys how I feel. This is why it's circular. It's why samsara is so circular. I'm asking you, anybody that's listening, watching, anyone here, I'm saying, first sit down. Spend some time watching the mind that wants to go do stuff. And if you do that, then if you're clear about that, then maybe you'll get up and go out and do something that might, you could say was adding to the problem or was warlike or whatever. But if it's coming out of awareness, then it is not going to add to the divisiveness. If it's coming out of awareness, then it is choiceless for you. If you have to think, should I or shouldn't I, don't do anything. But if you just have to do this without, one of the ways you can know is you don't feel like you need to explain it to anybody. You don't even need to tell anybody. You know what I'm saying? Guess what I'm going to go do? I'm going to go to Washington, D.C., or I'm going to go to Dakota Access Pipeline, or I'm going to go to Aleppo and be a medic, be a white helmet. You don't have to explain it. You just know this is what you have to do. Difficult. Real heroes are invisible. There's no advertisements for someone who's operating on that level of not to, of choicelessness. Further questions, please?
I do have a clarification.
Certainly.
When you say, don't add to, don't take away from, and don't ignore, but just observe, so at what point, when you're observing, is it, and you're done observing, and
Yeah.
you move on, is it not ignoring or taking away? I mean, at what point is that separation?
Okay, so, good question. So I would say it this way, and there's other ways of talking about this, but specifically, I would say that when I say don't add, don't subtract, don't divide, don't do, I know you can't help but do that. I mean, I can't help but do it, so that's all I know about it. But I'm saying that by saying that to you as a student, and by saying that to myself as a student, I'm also bringing my awareness to the degree to which I push, the degree to which I pull, and the degree to which I shut down. And by bringing awareness to that, the self-centeredness, don't do anything about it, just observe it. Because if you see that you're adding, don't stop adding, because that's wanting to be better than something. And if you see that you're shutting down, don't stop shutting down, because the awareness itself will handle that. So it's a way of, you could say, empowering your own Buddha nature, your own, or trusting. I like to say, trust yourself. And when I say that, I'm not saying trust your thoughts. I'm saying trust the space in which they occur. How do you trust the space in which thoughts occur? Just observe. And when you observe, you'll see how you're adding. To see how you're adding, to see how you're subtracting, or how you're meddling with your world is powerful material to help you transform yourself, transform your human life into what in our tradition is called the bodhisattva, or one who has totally devoted their life to others, serving others. And you can't serve others by, feeding them a bunch of propaganda. You have to meet them where they're at, and they may be in the middle of confusion, and you can't be there as someone who's not confused, never gets confused. You have to be a person who's confused in order to talk their language. So, but the only way you can do that is to not have a solid self that needs protecting. You have to be invincible from the point of view of destruction. You can't be destroyed. There's nothing can threaten you. It's called fearlessness. And it doesn't mean there isn't fear comes up, but it just doesn't happen to a solid identity or being. So I'm not sure if I have addressed your question particularly. You had a good question, and I probably went all the way around it and avoided it.
That's good.
I know I didn't answer your question.
That's okay.
Is it?
Yeah, 'cause
All
I know
right.
my answer.
Huh? I kind of answered it
Kind of.
with a capital K. Kind of. Yes.
Another question from Sheldon.
Sheldon,
As we go about life off the cushion, judging things as good and bad, right and wrong, it's hard to see it as just this. If we should begin to see just this off the cushion, does it become clear all at once or slowly come into focus?
yeah, it could be both. It seems, it doesn't seem to be, because what is getting mixed up with is all of your personal karma. You know, all the karmic causes and conditions that arise as your particular lifetime. You're here, you're alive, you were raised a certain way, you're treated a certain way. Your own tendency to shut down on things, or to open up, or to be warlike, or to be try to seduce your way into getting things you want, or fight your way into getting things you want, or ignoring the things you don't want so you can get the things you. I mean, there's just so many variables on it, so that I would say that as far as Sheldon's question, I would say that it could be a little bit of each. It could be all of one. I don't think there's any like particular way that it is going to happen. It could be in chunks and bits. It could be in a complete wave of understanding that could happen. I saw that yawn. Any other questions? Very good, thank you so much.
Thank you.